Next game in our progression is a trip up to the Pac-12 for Utah at Washington. And as Braden likes to say, styles make good fights. Well, we got one here because we got Utah's standout, physical, nasty defense going to Seattle to take on Michael Penix in a high-powered Washington offense. Washington averaging over 40 points a game. Utah only giving up around 16. Also, just a great matchup of the trenches. Utah's pass rush has been outstanding this year. Jonah Ellis has been one of the nation's best defensive linemen all year. We saw Arizona State have some success getting to Michael Penix and pressuring him a few weeks ago. So I am interested if Utah can make this a very ugly, low-scoring game and force Washington to win that way, or does Washington come out and play its style, jump on the scoreboard, force Utah out of its comfort zone, a team that's just not built to come from behind? This needs to be a very ugly, lower-scoring game, I think, for Utah to have a chance to win.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think very impressive last week, but it was Arizona State, but that's an impressive score line considering how they played against Oregon, Utah, how they played against Oregon. Washington, as you pointed out, offensively, everybody gets healthy against USC, and it's why USC has fired its defensive coordinator. They certainly did that last week, but there is no chance that Utah is going to give up a 199 yards before contact
Yeah.
to Dylan Johnson. Like, that's just not a thing that's going to happen. So I am curious what Kyle Whittingham wants to take away, because he's probably going to take away something. And to your point along the line of scrimmage, does it turn into that kind of game? Because again, if you put the Arizona State games up against each other, it's like, what are we talking about here? I mean, Utah 55-3, and then Michael Penix can't score a point on Arizona State. Like, it's so bizarre, the sort of the trio of games. But if this gets into, I mean, Utah is this way. We've said it all season. If this game gets into the 30s, the only one they can beat is USC.
Right. Yeah. To further emphasize the success that Dylan Johnson had last week, he had 430 rushing yards in his first 7 games. He had 256 against USC. So it was a
Yep.
performance that USC's defense had a lot to do with it. Washington is 124th in the nation in defensive success rate against the run. So if you're Utah, Vaki, Jaquindon Johnson, Jalen Glover, even Bryson Barnes on a few quarterback runs here, to me, this is, like I said, if you're Utah, you've got to find a way to win the style. You've got to find a way to win the style. You got to find a way to create some havoc, force a turnover, win the line of scrimmage, get Washington behind the sticks and force them to convert in 3rd and long. So if Utah can do that, I think they got a chance. Utah with 2 losses in the Pac-12, they need a lot to go right to get back in it. Obviously, for Washington, the stakes are high to make the college football playoff. So interesting, I think, is the good way to sum up this contrast in styles this Saturday.
Yeah, it's mostly about learning about Washington, honestly. Like, I think the Oregon game, while Oregon is a far better team offensively than Utah, more dynamic, more versatile quarterback play, whatever. But like, that ended up being a much more physical game than I think anybody outside of Washington and Oregon expected. They probably expected it inside the rivalry. But this is sort of if Washington is being quote unquote disrespected with their ranking, they're an undefeated team with a couple of really big wins. They belong at 2, or they belong at 1, or they belong at 3, like we talked about earlier in the show. This is one of those games where it's like, yeah, come on in here. We're gonna be willing to play as physically as we did against Oregon. We're gonna show you that wasn't a 1-game thing against an arch rival, and we'll play down here with you in this situation. Because again, the Arizona State game, while it was not a physical line of scrimmage game, it was a low scoring game. Like, Washington has played other types of games this year. And so to me, it's just about learning. Washington still has to prove itself, apparently, according to the committee. And even me, I'm sort of one of the guys that thinks that they still need to do it. And I think this is a perfect opportunity. You're at home. I like Utah to cover because I think Utah, to your point, will be able to run the football. And I think they're going to make it dirty. But I think Penix makes a couple of big plays in the 4th quarter. I think the receiving core is too dynamic outside on the edge. That's where the one place you can attack Utah is kind of outside and get down the field a little bit. And so I think he makes a few plays. I like Utah to cover, but I would take Washington to win.
I would echo your prediction as well. I like Washington to win. Also, you brought up, how Washington wins. They beat Arizona in Tucson a few weeks ago in kind of a lower scoring game. So I think these different style of games is good for Washington as it tries to
Yeah.
mold down the stretch here. But I do think with Utah's defense, and they should be able to run the ball, I think they can hang around here. I just think Washington at home, even if Jalen McMillan doesn't play for Washington, I think they still find a way to win, much like they did against Oregon.
That road game against Arizona looking better and better for Washington. We haven't talked much. We did touch on Jed Fish, I guess, just a second ago on the show, but that's a good quality win for Arizona last week. So I think what's interesting is to me it's like 30-27, or 30-23 is kind of how I'm feeling, and that is pretty close to what the Washington Arizona score was. So I'll take Washington, but Utah to cover.